Yeah, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're members. We're a minute late, which I don't like because spent my whole life coming on parade at time. So, but I would like to welcome everybody this afternoon. Just before we start, I did make a dispensation outside for anybody. Where you can see we're in relaxed dresses today for the heat and everything else. So feel free to whatever you. I'll get to that in a minute. More. Feel free to wear whatever you feel comfortable in. Bear in mind we are being webcast. So welcome to the Growth and Infrastructure Review Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to bring your attention to some housekeeping matters. There is not expected to be a fire alarm testing today. Therefore, if the alarm sounds, please follow the fire and emergency procedures that are applicable to the council house. Please can I ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting and it's switched off when you're not using it, and your mobile devices are turned to silent.
They are now, Chair.
Also, this meeting is broadcast live to the internet. During the meeting, agenda item number 1, to note the appointment of the chair and vice chair for the municipal year of 22-23, and this is for the committee. To note the appointment of myself as chair and Councillor Coker as vice chair for the municipal year 22-23. Item 2, can I ask, have we received any apologies?
Through you, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Lugger today.
Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda this afternoon? Councillor Tibbetts.
With the items mentioning the University of Plymouth, I'm a student at the University of Plymouth.
Thanks, Councillor Tibbetts. I'll make a note of that.
Sorry, Jeremy. Yeah.
I'm Alex, employee of the University of Plymouth. It's now on apparently.
Councillor Poyser, I'm an employee of City College Plymouth as well. Just might be some crossover with the City Change, with the Shared Prosperity Fund.
That's it for the declarations of interest. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So we're assuming over this side quite rightly so that they're private interests rather than the pecuniaries. Yeah, okay, noted as such. Okay, item 4 is minutes. To confirm the minutes of the meeting out on the 23rd of February 2022, and I see there are a couple in the room who can vouch for these. I was not at that meeting, but I see a couple of people who were. Yeah, I mean, Mr. Councillor Coker was here, yeah. Councillor Rendy, Councillor Salmon. So,
I'm happy to move that we accept chair.
Can I have a seconder? Well, Councillor Salmon is a seconder because thank you. Item number 5 is chair's urgent business. I have none today. Moving swiftly along to item number 6. Terms of reference, pages 17 to 18 in your pack. I don't know if there's any observations, but it's only for us to note our terms of reference. You okay with that? Item number 7, the policy briefing. Again, it's in your pack. Policy briefing give you an idea of stuff that may impact. It's only for us to note the report, but if there is anything anybody wants to contribute, now is the time. Okay. Item 8 on the agenda, which is a Climate Emergency Action Plan 2022 and a Corporate Carbon Reduction Plan 2022. These are the in-year monitor reports. They're pages 19 to 56 in your report. I've read the report. Thank you for the report, Cabinet Member, for providing that. Is there anything today that you'd like to update us from the reports that have already been sent in? I've read it and I'm quite comfortable with the report, but just give you an opportunity if there's anything you want to add to track, anything's changed between then and now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. It gives me great pleasure to update Scrutiny on the progress made with the actions in our Climate Emergency Action Plan and our Corporate Carbon Reduction Plan, which was agreed earlier this year at full council. Can I pay tribute to Councillor Dan and Councillor Bridgman for their leadership on climate change work to date? And I very much wish to continue the cross-party working on this vital agenda. And I extend that to Councillor Coker and Councillor Poyser as we move forward through this municipal year. The report before you covers the progress on the 114 actions from the Climate Emergency Action Plan and the 35 actions from our Corporate Carbon Reduction Plan. Of the 114 actions in the Climate Emergency Action Plan, we have completed 5 and 107 are well underway. The 2 actions that are not progressing are due to unsuccessful funding bids. Of the 35 actions in the Corporate Carbon Reduction Plan, we have completed 3, 30 are underway, and again there are 2 which are not progressing, which I will be reviewing with the relevant departmental leads shortly. The report before you highlights some of the great achievements, which include updating our taxi policy to support the move to ultra-low emission vehicles, consulting on radical climate emergency planning.
Excuse me, Councillor, can I just, I've got the distinct impression that's not going out as an electronic signature, even though your lungs, and as we're broadcast. Yeah, that's the word.
Secure funding from government to continue Green Homes programme, implement social housing decarbonisation projects, and to install heat pumps and other measures in our own buildings to emissions. Continue to roll out sustainable transport measures through the Transforming Cities Fund programme, supporting over 12,000 Plymouth employees to go green through grants to local businesses and launching a Green Tourism Award scheme. Continuing to develop strategic transport schemes with integrated walking and cycling measures to improve the efficiency of the highway network and to reduce congestion. Submitting proposals for a solar array at Chelsea Meadow, which could provide 70% of the City Council's total energy needs. Expanding the Climate Ambassadors programme and developing new engagement approaches with partners and local people on climate change. Establish the Climate Emergency Investment Fund to support carbon reduction initiatives. Continuing to lobby and work with government to make the case for more investment and powers to respond to our climate emergency declaration. And there are many, many more, but I will stop there. This is all I wanted to say by way of introduction, Chair. In conclusion, we are continuing to make good progress with significant levels of investment in both plans. You have the detailed reports on progress with all the actions, and I and the officers are happy in attendance, are happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for the report. It's very in-depth. Made a good bit of reading, actually. Very clear understanding with the traffic light sequence. Give us an idea of where we are, what's completed, what's underway, and I'm completely happy with it. I noticed there is a couple of reds in there, which I'm sure we'll come to. So I'll open this up to members of the committee. First off, Councillor Coker.
Sorry, Mark, I'm not sure what's going on.
Try that one. Okay, thank you very much. First of all, James, I want to accept your offer publicly of working cross-party. This is a really important issue. and we do need to take this forward. One of the first question from me is reading the update. The majority of the actions are kind of, we've got a target of 2030. What this report is kind of all about here and now. What we need to be doing is looking at targets for 12 months, targets for 5 years, targets for 2030. And I think if people pick this up, the strategic nature of it is actually not there. I can see some nods around from my fellow councillors. So a plea for me on that is, can we look at that and make it more clear going forward?
Thank you, Councillor Coker. Yes, a strategic plan is something that I will be working with officers to identify. I think it will make our job much easier, so we can look at the long-term solutions for the city and the long-term implications that's going to have. So I fully support that proposal. And I have been briefed by officers on the more strategic approach, and this is something I'll be willing to share with you as Shadow Cabinet Member for the portfolio.
Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. James, I just have to compliment you on a very extensive report. I mean, there's everything in there. Having read through it, it's just a very small thing I just wanted to see if we have any more information on, which is page 27, reference 311, where we're engaging with Western Power to understand the impact of new developments. Do we have a list of developments which might be applicable to us here in Plymouth? If so, could I have a copy if possible? Thank you.
Perhaps if I could pick that up, Chair. I think in essence the list of developments are the ones that are set out in the joint local plan already. Right. So obviously our game plan for the city in terms of the growth agenda and where housing and employment and other development is to be located is set out in the joint local plan with various allocated sites. In fact, 115 allocated housing sites and 43 allocated employment sites. We have been discussing with all utility companies, but in particular Western Power, how we can better coordinate infrastructure planning across the board so that we can better manage the delivery of those projects and the associated infrastructure. So I'd probably point you in the direction of the sites in the local plan, but the reason for the action was to reflect the fact that obviously we need to work with Western Power to, for example, bring forward the EV chargers programme and extend that programme in terms of decarbonising transport.
Thank you very much. I was just looking at maybe there's possibilities outside of the current plan, that was all. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Goslin.
With reference to section 3.47, area focus reference 3.47 on mobility, this to secure Millie Holland project funding in order to deliver a feasibility study considering how Plymouth communities can be designed to facilitate greater levels of walking and cycling, less reliance on private car. So I'm sure everyone's disappointed that we were not successful in application for the Department of Transport's Millie Holland fund. Is there any possibility that that the development of future LTNs or the investigation of future LTNs across the city can be investigated through applications for other funding sources so that we don't abandon this project and we look for other funding?
Thank you. I'll take that one. Yes, no, fully support that. I was greatly disappointed we didn't get the funding for that. I'm looking for any stream of funding to help with any sustainable travel modes. I was looking forward to it as a trial. I think you may be aware there was an area was selected and I was looking forward to seeing how it progressed. Disappointed we didn't get the funding. I know the team were greatly disappointed we didn't get the funding on this round, but I know they're always looking out for any opportunities to see if we can try and get that sort of scenario in the future.
Councillor Coker.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to one of my favourite subjects, buses. As you know, that we didn't get any, disappointingly, any funding on the Better Bus grant from government. We are in a crucial time for the bus industry at the moment. nationally it's recognised that there are going to be route cuts everywhere. One of the reasons that I think, and we've all got our own opinions on this, one of the reasons I think is we weren't bold enough about infrastructure. Now, transport counts for a third of all emissions in this city at the moment. We can't just, in the climate change, we've got it now as red, which I understand, but we can't just leave it. It's going to be fundamental that we get the modal shift in the next 8 years. So my question is, what are we doing within our power to make sure that we have the infrastructure for buses? Because I'm afraid this is one area that's just going to be left, and it's going to be in the too difficult to do mark. So my question is, what plans have we to tackle this other than waiting for somebody in government to say we're going to put another round of bidding in?
Thank you, Councillor Coker. I also, too, was greatly disappointed that we didn't get anything through the bus service improvement plan. The one thing I was hoping was a multimodal contactless ticket on all the sorts of sustainable transport, whether it be either the bus operators or our local ferry operators here, Mountbatten, Mount Edgecombe, and maybe the trains in the future. It didn't happen, as you so rightly said. Greatly disappointed on that. I know the bus companies were also disappointed on that. Probably like yourself, when you were cabinet member, I have regular meetings with them as well. We share open discussions. I've actually approached Johnny Mercer MP as well to lobby on our behalf, because we are a bus city with 3 universities now, major employers, etc. Princess Yachts, the dockyard, etc. We have congestion. We need to be looking at sustainable transport answers to our network. He is working on that. And I actually personally have raised it with Baroness Fear as well, when I had a call with officers as well, to try and say that we do need better. We are a bus city. It's reliant on virtually everybody in the city. So the officers are trying, we're trying as well, and at every opportunity I get to raise it. I also raised it recently when I was in Birmingham at a Strategic Transport Board conference with one of the ministers there.
So the answer to my question is, all we're doing is lobbying our MP, or we're raising it at a national level with Baroness Veer. But have we any plans within our public transport team to actually move this agenda forward, regardless of whether it's a massive move forward? What I'm afraid of, and I represent an area which has a huge bus patronage number, it's just not good enough for us to say we will just keep asking government. So what have we in plans in this council to do something about bus reliability, bus infrastructure, and providing the necessary incentives to get more people out of their cars and onto their bus?
We're working on the enhanced partnership with the bus operators as well, to see how we can take that forward, listening to their suggestions. They're the operator. What can we do to try and help them? And I know the team are working on that at the moment. Paul, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add about where we are with that programme.
Yeah, that will be a report to Cabinet later in the year, and we're still required, of course, to update the bus services improvement plan. And notwithstanding our disappointment in not receiving any award, we were asked by government to be ambitious, and we were. The programme was massively oversubscribed across the country, and obviously resources were allocated in the way that they were. Let's not forget, we're also making improvements through the Transforming Cities Fund programme. So there are bus improvements and sustainable transport improvements that are going to be hitting the ground very shortly through that programme. And of course, if there are other funding opportunities linked to bus infrastructure, we'll take those opportunities in putting those bids forward. So the enhanced partnership will provide the strategic framework for those ongoing discussions with bus operators. We liaise very closely, as does the cabinet member, with those organisations. The position needs to stabilise on the back of the COVID impacts on patronage. And obviously we're in close liaison with the bus companies to ensure that we can help them as best we can in relation to supporting bus services in the city, given the importance of bus services to how people get around to their places of work and leisure in the city.
Councillor Tibbetts?
Oh, there we go. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. My question is for Councillor Stoneman on reference 3.22 on the surface water storage in Trefusis Park. I know that Tolgy Woods, the CIC, which is in Compton Ward, has previously spoken about plans to improve the water storage coming off of their land onto Trefusis Park. So I was wondering how the engagement is going with that local community interest company, and how you're planning to continue to engage with them to make sure that their land is properly used to make sure that this delivery of the new water storage is successful.
Perhaps if I take that, as my natural infrastructure team and engineers are working with the community on that project. So we've been through a process of designing the flood alleviation measures, bringing forward a sustainable urban drainage approach to the known flooding issues in that part of the city. Trefusis Park will be part of that. My understanding is the feedback to date has been very positive, and I think we're in the process of finalising the designs and securing all the funding to make it happen. I think if Councillor Tibbetts would like a separate briefing on that project in detail, very happy to pick that up outside the meeting, Chair.
That would be fab, thank you.
Councillor Gosling?
I think it's over to Councillor Dreen again. Mobility, reference 3.43. It's about the failure of securing tranche 3 of the active travel fund. Can you give us all details? We were highly successful in tranches 1 and 2 of the active travel fund. Why did we not fail to secure funding for tranche 3? Because this is an important part of our funding for sustainable transport across the city. It's led to lots of improvements that are currently in plan. What happened here?
I think there's just been such a popular scheme going across the country, really. We've engaged with local businesses. Lots of them have done, as you say, in parts 1 and 2. I guess basically it's just been so popular. Again, we look at all schemes we can bid. We've got a successful team that write the bids for them. Paul, I don't know if you've got any definitive as to why we didn't on the 3rd.
No, I believe I'm right in saying it was oversubscribed, but I don't think we've had any detailed feedback from the Department of Transport to date. So if Councillor Gosling allow me, I'll, on the back of his question, see if I can find out why that bid wasn't successful, and happy to report back in writing to the scrutiny panel.
Thank you. As a supplemental, how are we funding the 2 schemes which were a part of that process that are supposed to be going forward, the Plymouth Road and Central Park improvements? How are they going to be funded, given we haven't got tranche 3 funding?
Well, we'll be looking at that as part of the overall capital programme, so it will depend on how the funding pans out in relation to the other sources of capital resources that we're going to bring those projects forward.
Councillor Poyser?
Question for Councillor Dreen, just following on from Mark Coker's, Councillor Coker's comments about bus services. Obviously, the council finds itself in a rather precarious position with its budget at the present moment, and there are also challenges in providing to support bus services. I was just wondering whether the council will be exploring any options for raising funds to support buses and bus services in the future, rather waiting for government support at any point, and whether there's a kind of option-style appraisal that the council could go through to look at funding options.
Thank you, Councillor Poyser, for the question. We're always looking at funding opportunities, especially on the sustainable transport and the bus network, given how it's reacted over the last couple of years, if you like, with the pandemic. The last figures I saw, I think there was patronage was about 75 to 80% on the buses for the commercial passengers, and on the elderly passes, I think they was down at 45 to 50%. So there's still a long way to getting patronage on board. So we recognise there's funding issues there. We recognise that we need to work with them to try and get footfall back onto the services as well. And we need to make sure that the needy are not cut off on services as well. So the team are really good at looking every opportunity where we can try and help and what options are available to us. So yes, we do look at all options to try and keep the services going.
There we go, back on. Yeah, just to supplement you on that, thank you, Councillor Dream. I'm just wondering whether the Cabinet member has got a handle on perhaps when issues with patronage and also COVID funding has dropped off, when that might impact upon bus services, whether that might be further increases on cost of bus tickets, or even it's October time.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's October. Thank you for that. I said that without my lips moving. That's really good, actually. Yeah, there is some work going on in the background at the moment with the transport team, looking at services, looking at patronage figures, and things like that. The really good thing is that I'm sure you're aware, City Bus, for example, whenever you get on, whether you have a pass or whether you pay for a fare, it's recorded as a transaction at that stop. So there's some really good data that's always kept by them and shared with us as well. So, as I say, there is work going on in the background with the operators, and they share their details with us.
Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who to direct this at, so my apologies in advance. 3.55, mobility. Engaging with taxi drivers. Who's on that one?
I think it's being covered by the leader at the moment for taxis, but go ahead with your question. If I can help, I'll try to.
Okay, so we're currently, it says in the report, we're currently providing 1 hour free so that drivers of electric vehicles can park in Theatre Royal to charge their cars up if so needed. Would it not make more sense to provide specific fast chargers for a Hackney fleet along the Hackney bays that they're allowed to park at, so that while they're waiting in queue, they can charge their vehicle up in a short time, knowing full well, no matter where they could be requested to go, it's on a half-hour fast charge. I am aware that some of the charges we're fitting in the city, namely a few in my ward, are not the super quick chargers that can be fitted. They are quite a low kilowattage and they take quite a few hours to charge up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. It is for the leader. However, I did receive an email from a taxi operator with a vehicle who raised this very point. I did pass it on to the officers. The officers are looking at a location. I think the nervousness that was explained to me about a physical rank was if they were on that rank and there were cars or taxis behind them and they didn't want to move off if they haven't been charged. But the team are looking at a location where they can safely park off to be a rapid. I don't know, Paul, if we've got any further information on that.
No, Dundee have taken some steps in this direction in terms of creating effectively a electric vehicle sort of charging station, which is used by motorists for rapid charging, but also for the taxi trade in that city. So we've met with Dundee and to learn on how they've implemented that. There's an ongoing conversation with the taxi trade in terms of providing the infrastructure in the right place to the right speed, as you said, in order to not disrupt their business. So there is a desire to work in collaboration with the trade to take those opportunities forward.
Can I have a quick supplementary? So on the back of that, when you say the trade, can I ask who you've spoke to when we colloquially refer to the trade? Often it just ends up being Hackney carriage drivers. Are you including all the private hire offices as well, and all the independent Hackney carriage drivers that don't subscribe to a local?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not.
Just a second before you answer that. I'm a little bit wary about coming out with individuals' names in this committee. So I'm happy for us to refer to organisations if we spoke to a particular organisation, but I don't want to name an individual person by an email or a telephone conversation.
Yeah, please don't mention any names, but there are 3 Hackney carriage groups, and then there's all the private hire offices. If you spoke to all of them, then yes and yes to both is more than sufficient for me to understand that question. Thank you.
My understanding is that the colleagues in public health who are leading on this have met with all the relevant different associations. So I think the answer to your question is yes, all of the different parts of the trade are being engaged. But obviously, if you require more details, we can get the colleagues who are leading on this action to set out more detail, if that would be helpful.
So you be aware, Jeremy, just so you're probably all aware that this particular area of council business has been my baby for 4 years. And it's only since I've left the cabinet really that I'm not responding in a formal way like at Monday's full council. But this particular topic, I was all over, engaging with everybody, understand everything. I can answer any questions you want on the taxi side of things. With regard the EVs, as I understand it, or EV points, when we engaged pre-consultation with the trade and then physically consultation with the trade and subsequent consultation with the trade, it's a case of technology, and it's a case of how that technology moves on. So the vehicles are going to get more efficient with the batteries and that sort of thing. And they're also looking at, which Councillor Green talked about there, about having taxis on a rank, which normally queue and just move along, and then off they go and take their fare. It's very difficult then, you know, as you keep jumping out, plugging into the next one up the line. There's a technology coming along, as I understand it, which is charging in the road itself. Yes. So I think I'm confident the 4 years that I've been around the taxi licence trade in this city, the involvement I've had with the officers in the department, licensing department, infrastructure, and looking at charging and everything else, that as and when the opportunity to improve electric vehicle charging points for taxis as it comes on and the appropriate way of delivering that in a sustainable manner, I'm confident that we will engage and that will be the way going forward. So I understand where you're coming from, 100%, because it is important to encourage them. We're talking about supporting them, so we've got to ensure that we're doing that, but we've got to do it in a practical manner. And up until I left it only a couple of months ago, 6 weeks ago, we were engaging in a proper manner. Yeah, can I put you down, Lee, and I'm just going to come across to Councillor Coker.
Thank you. I wasn't going to come back to this, but it's a follow-up to Councillor Poyser on buses. All through the pandemic, we paid the concessionary bus rate at 2019 levels. That is now being phased out. And not that I want to kind of challenge your figures, Councillor Green, but I'm told at the current moment, the concessionary rate on buses is about 60 to 62% of pre-pandemic levels. That means 38% of people that travelled before the pandemic are not. In our council budget for concessionary fares, based on, unless it's changed from when I did it, we always worked out how many people would use their passes so that we covered the budget. So with only, with 38% of that budget not being used, are we putting that budget aside? Because what I greatly fear is after September, the end of September, when the government reduce all subsidies and they're looking at reducing basic funding as well. I listened to the Transport Select Committee a couple of weeks ago where all operators are saying we're going to be, they didn't say getting rid of, they used a technical word about reviewing all of their commercial operations and coming to local authorities saying we're going to reduce this route unless you step in to help fund it. So what preparations are we making? Because we had a problem a few years ago when one operator gave us all our subsidised bus routes back, and I fear that we might be in a position early winter that we are inundated with bus routes coming back to us, or with the possibility of coming back to us.
Thanks for the question. As I say, there's a review going on at the moment working with the bus companies, and Paul's team, there's one member away at the moment who normally look after this area. But we are aware of the levels. They're obviously better than I last saw, so thank you for the correction on that. And it is a worry to us. It is a worry to me, really. We need the bus service. We need to fund it somehow. We know there are routes out there that are not doing well at the moment, which is why we're doing the review, working with the bus companies as well. Paul, did you want to just pick up on the funding? Because it should still be there, I think.
Yeah, the budget would have been set, obviously, as part of the council's tax setting process at the February full council. And obviously the broader answer to Councillor Coker's question is that will be looked at in the context of the other budgetary pressures that we're facing. But the point's noted that clearly there are challenges. I think there have been some recent improvements in patronage levels, both in fare box paying, but also concessionary fares. But it is well below the pre-pandemic levels, so there could be challenges to the viability of commercial routes going forward. So that'll have to be looked at in the round. Will be my advice to cabinet members.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. Just so I'm clear, what I think you said to me in officer speak was that in the budget, we have a budget for this financial year for concessionary payments. We are not putting that money to one side. That money will be used or could be used to help other budgets within the department. So we're not ring fencing it for public transport going forward. Just so that everybody here knows when they get residents coming to them and saying, why is this bus altering? We have an answer.
I'm prepared to ring fence that money for the services. I have no problem with that. We need to operate the service.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I'm sure there's a few of us in this room today that will be absolutely delighted that you have now ring-fenced the concessionary bus fare budget to not be able to be used for any other area within SPNI. Thank you.
Councillor Tippett.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question, I believe, again, is for Councillor Stoneman. It's disappointing to see in this report that there is a lack of engagement with the new Arts University Plymouth. And, for example, looking at point 3.78, working with Plymouth Marjon University to create student sustainability champions. Do you have any plans to further engage with Arts University Plymouth to make sure that they are part of our climate emergency response and that they're not left tailing behind? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tippett, for your question. Your short answer is yes. I think engaging with anybody in the city, any institution, any public institution is key. So yeah, moving forward, we will be looking to work with Arts University Plymouth, as well as our other two partners, Plymouth Marjon and University of Plymouth, going forward on our climate emergency work. Thank you.
Councillor Gosling.
Last question for Councillor Drain, I promise. Mobility, section reference 3.42. Lead a car-free day to support residents to walk, cycle and use public transport rather than the car for regular journeys. So currently that's noted as underway due to the ongoing support of the Sustrans scheme, Big Walk and Wheel, which has been going for quite a few years. Have you got any plans for anything more substantial here, like closure of carriageways for motor traffic to encourage, a substantial shift in sustainable transport going forward, which seems to be sort of implied by this title? Are there any plans in place for that?
Thank you for the question. There is some plans for Crown Hill Road to go back to 2 carriageways either direction, of which one side would be a dedicated bus lane and car lane on the other side. That's through the Transforming Cities Future Fund. That's the only road at the moment that there's any plans for a new dedicated bus lane at the moment.
This 3.42 is not about a permanent change to traffic. It is to lead a car-free day. This has been done in many other cities, not only here in across Europe and the United States as well, as to have a day where you close major carriageways to motor traffic to encourage people to walk, scoot and cycle to wherever they're going. And this seems to, this is to lead a car-free day, which you need to do. In order to do that, you need to close the carriageways to motor traffic. So is the Plymouth City Council going to lead a car-free day through the closure of carriageways? Any plans to do that?
I'll happily look at that with the team. I mean, I myself last year at the car-free day didn't use the car. I used public transport all around the city for my meetings and everything. At the moment, strategically, as a lot of people know, there's a lot of roadworks and things going on as well, which is causing a lot of congestion out there and everything. I think if there are areas that we can identify to do it, I'm happy to look at it. But I think there's other factors we've got to look into as well. I think we would need to look at it quite in depth in the areas that we were going to look at it. But I'm happy to look at it with the officers and the team to see if we can identify an area and come back to you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Finn.
Chair, just one thing over EV charging, whether it be boats, cars, etc. As we know in the IT trade 25 years ago, the standardisation of USB obviously helped us all, and we're working to that today. As we're aware on the markets currently, there's eight or nine different cables, there's AC, there's DC charging, etc. What progress is being made in just providing a standardised charging system so we're not actually wasting money by providing, say, old technology as we go forward?
Yeah, the government have recognised this in their EV infrastructure strategy that they recently produced in order to try to get that standardisation. The government strategy is built around private sector investment in that infrastructure, but set against a series of standards that the industry would design to and meet. Alongside that is the ease of use. Those of you who may have used EV charging stations would have grappled with all sorts of different apps and login procedures and cards and things that you have to use depending on which is the supplier. So the government have recognised that in order for supporting the transition from petrol and diesel to electric vehicles, that the ease of use is a key factor. And then lastly, and by no means least, is the scale of the infrastructure that is required, both to support long-distance travel, but also to support short-distance travel where that vehicle is the mode of choice for that individual household. So that gets you into the debate about the type of charges. As you know, we've installed 53 pop-up chargers in the city, because not everybody has a drive which can accommodate an off-street charging facility, and we're looking at other ways in which we can encourage EV chargers across the city. So, as was announced by the Cabinet member at full council this week, the programme currently stands at 715 EV chargers. We need to get to around 800-900 in order to provide the necessary infrastructure the city needs. So I think those points are being picked up by the government in the EV strategy, and obviously we'll be looking to maximise future funding bids to roll out the further EV infrastructure that the city needs.
Right, thank you. I've got Councillor Holloway next, and then Councillor Poyser, and I'm going to bring it to an end. I'll put on Councillor Tippett, then I'm going to bring it to an end because we've run over our time. And I want to look and see if we're going to get any recommendations out of what we talked about today. So, Councillor Holloway, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Stoneman, my question's for you. Congratulations on your appointment to Cabinet and the creation of a new role recognising climate change at Cabinet level. Suggests that we might see a slightly different approach under this current Cabinet. So my question is on the creation of your new Cabinet role. What changes do you anticipate as a result of being in post, particularly in relation to this plan's execution? And related to that, coming into post, which parts of the plan are of greatest concern and greatest priority to you at the moment?
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. Oh, is that one working?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway, for your question, and thank you on your congratulations to me being in Cabinet. I'll answer the second part first because I think it's slightly easier. I think the biggest area of concern for me at the minute is the transport element of the challenge we face. So in the form of the bus services, I think transport is one of the biggest issues that we're going to face in moving forward to try and reach our goal of net zero by 2030. And I think a lot of work has been put into that, and a lot of work is going to be needed to be put into it. But I think that's the area that highlights the most concern to me because it isn't going to be easy. So, yeah, and I think we're going to need to keep a close eye on that going forward to see what we need to do to speed that process up. I'm sorry, can you just remind me the first part of your question? Sorry.
Yeah, what changes do you anticipate as a result of the creation of your role? How will things be different in relation to the execution of this plan? What do you plan to do that was different before this Cabinet role was created?
So I think having a dedicated Cabinet member whose sole focus is climate change, I think it's going to be able to shine a light on it in the level that it deserves. You know, it's one of the biggest issues facing us at the minute, and I think that's going to be a big change that we're going to see. Is it becoming front and centre of definitely my work, and I would hope the further administration's work. And cross-party work, that's going to be one of the big changes that I'm going to implement. Working because we also...
Councillor, sorry, can I just interrupt you there? Because just to remind you, Councillor Holloway, but we all do it, I know it as well. So just for people's understanding now, this is webcast. If I switch my microphone on, the camera comes to me. If I switch my microphone off or don't switch it off, it won't go to anybody else. If I switch it off, it goes to the next one that's on. All right, and it will stay on that one, even if somebody else is speaking, until they switch that one off. So for the sake of going out to broadcast, I can just remind you right at the beginning of what I said is when you're speaking, put your mic on, but when you're not, turn it off, because that camera will not go to the next person speaking for the webcast. Okay? Thank you very much. Carry on.
Thank you. We've obviously got the creation of a new group in the council now, as well as the existing Labour group, and I think that cross-party work is going to be something that becomes front and centre for me under my portfolio, because this is too big to be political, as far as I'm concerned. I've said that in meetings with Councillor Poyser and also Councillor Coker. So I think that's going to be something that's going to see a big change. And also working with my Cabinet colleagues in every portfolio. I'm in the unique position where my portfolio covers an element of every portfolio that's in the Cabinet. So I think being in the position that I'm in, being able to have these conversations with Cabinet colleagues, you know, with it being my sole focus rather than having to look here, there and everywhere else within my portfolio, I think that's going to be one of the changes that we see going forward, and I hope that is replicated in the work that we see coming out of the administration over the next year. Thank you.
I'll have a quick supplementary, thank you. That's really reassuring to hear that, you know, there's this cross-cabinet approach and you're going to drive that in your work. Yeah, I just want to probe a little bit further on the specific changes that means as a result. You know, fantastic that it's more of a priority, but do you see, you know, practically any, you know, the things that you'll be working with officers, will there be different things happening practically as a result?
I think the biggest thing to come out of it is going to be the strategic focus of the climate emergency within the council. I think the previous cabinet holders for this portfolio have set a good foundation, a good bedrock for moving forward as we move forward to the acceleration phase of our plans. And I think the more strategic approach, the more coherent approach moving forward is going to be one of the biggest changes that we can all use as a way to monitor and see where we need to go forward to reach our goal by 2030.
Councillor Poyser.
Thank you, Chair. Also, I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Stoneman on his appointment as well into the new post as well. Looking forward to working cross-party as well as with cross cabinet and across with all the officers as well in delivering this really important action plan that we've got here that is very broad, comprehensive, cuts across so many departments within our council and touches upon so many budget lines as well. So, you know, collective, cohesive support is going to be so important on this. While we're here, I just wanted to focus in on one particular aspect of this as well, which is around waste. There was a particular appointment of a consultant resource futures under 3.7. I just wondered, first of all, whether that particular report could be shared with this particular group as well, this committee group. I also wanted to just highlight that drilling into aspects of the waste element of this report, that reuse doesn't really play a major part in here. And reuse has a really massive social benefit as well that could deliver to this city. So I just wondered whether, when we're coming to recommendations, whether we could consider maybe focusing on reuse and how we support reuse within the city as well.
Yeah, certainly, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I mean, we are still waiting for guidance and legislation from government, and there's a whole range of stuff we're expecting over the next 12 months or so, Paul. And I think that will really influence how and what we do and what our future approach to that will be. We're sort of we've got to wait for that, and that will definitely guide us in the directions in which we wish to go. I agree with you that the waste agenda is a big, challenging agenda, and the changes that are going to be brought in place from government are going to have some fundamental changes in the way that we will have to operate as a waste authority. So trying to second guess those until they're sort of brought forward in legislative frameworks is really quite difficult. So it's not that we're sitting on it and thinking we're not doing anything. We're waiting for that, which will most definitely inform the direction of travel that we will be going as an organisation, and indeed every local authority across the country. So it's an item that is constantly raised in the Southwest Directors Forum, which I chair for the Association of Directors of Environment, Planning and Transport, and that will be, I'm stepping down from that role this year, and then next year I'm going to have a national role with them, and that will be an opportunity to interface very closely with DEFRA on what their priorities are. So I agree entirely with you. The waste agenda is going to be a massive, big agenda and a big opportunity actually. And it's not just about reuse. It's about preventing it in the first place. And there's significant elements which are out with the responsibility of a local authority in terms of the producers of waste in the first place, which is all part of the consultation government have been going through. So it's a very complex set of issues, but ones which I'm very much aware of, and ones that we're waiting for a bit more of a steer from government before we jump, if you like, into what we do as the next phase. So hopefully that's helpful.
And finally, but by no means, these Councillor Tippett.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the further into the community engagement when it comes to tackling the climate emergency, it's positive to see a lot of intervention going into schools where we could know and will guarantee that we're going to hit every young person in making sure that they understand how we're tackling climate change and how they can take responsibility themselves. However, there doesn't seem to be that much here talking about how we engage with other generations to make sure that we are hitting everyone, and rather than just people who are already more actively engaged in their communities and getting involved with opportunities in their local libraries and local community groups. So how are we going to make sure that we do hit everyone, to make sure that we don't see misplaced anger at the council when we're tackling the climate emergency, and also make sure that everyone feels like they're all part of taking responsibility to tackling this big issue?
Thank you, Councillor Tippett, for your question. There are a couple of answers. Firstly, I think engagement in our already existing establishments, such as you said, libraries. I think, you know, we have a high number of people who use the libraries, maybe not so many as before the pandemic, but we still have a high number of people who use the libraries. And as our libraries transform and turn into more hubs of the community, I think that in that aspect is when we're going to be able to really engage with those generations who aren't in the education system or who have left. And I think secondly, in my role, I'll be working with my cabinet colleagues into how I can how we can send the message of what part you can play in your own lives through, you know, transport, through homes and communities, and obviously education as well, because it isn't just children's education that we can use, it's also the existing adult education infrastructure that we have in place. And I think, you know, perhaps maybe one of the more obvious solutions and tools that we can use is communication through our existing comm structure. And admittedly, that doesn't reach everyone. So maybe there's some work that we can do to make sure, that I can do, is to make sure that we're using comms to the best of our ability to be able to reach as many people as we can and spread the message that everyone needs to play their part. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Councillor. Thank you for that. Thank you for members' engagement. I'm in two minds on this because we've got recommendations that are already printed in front of us, but I've got the impression today that with some of the questions and suggestions that's come from members, that you have taken those on board and you are prepared to look at this and look at that, and you said it now. I don't know if I want to go into a big long list of recommendations for something that you've already taken on board, but I think something that might give us a bit of direction. Right at the beginning, Councillor Coker talked about a more strategic direction for the report. So I note that the recommendation says to acknowledge the progress made in delivering, the two reports. I wonder, without us making a formal recommendation, could we accept that points that are made here today, that you guys will take it on board, and when you come with the report next time around, it will include elements that were brought in today and will take it for, give us some sort of strategic direction? Are you happy to take it on board? Are members happy to go around that way rather than try and traipse out a great big long list of?
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Coker.
Thank you, Chair. I just don't want, we had an agreement earlier on from Councillor Drain about the concessionary bus budget. That's actually a really pleasing agreement, but actually that needs to be minuted, and it needs to be a recommendation that this is followed through, because otherwise you could walk away from this meeting and say, well, that didn't happen. It's a fundamental change to everything that we've done in the past. So I really do think the commitment that Councillor Dream has given us, that we actually need to record that.
Yeah, so I'm happy to record that. Have you got anything you want to say about it?
Well, Chair, could I just say I recognise that and I welcome that from the committee, and I think that's positive. I think there is the caveat that we need to at least bear in mind the conversations that will be ongoing throughout the course of the year about priorities across all budget lines, and where we end up with, because I can't predict where we're going to end up. And so whilst that commitment can be made, there could be significant changes in budgetary position, which means we may have to reflect and review on a range of budget lines as we move forward. So I think that's a caveat that I would just say needs to be at least recognised and acknowledged.
I fully accept the strategic director's point, but the actual question that I asked was that I'm not asking for budgets to be taken from anywhere. What I'm actually saying is, can we have, well, we've had the commitment that the concessionary bus fare, and I'm not going to go into figures, is ring-fenced to use for public transport should there be a surplus. If we do not get, we've still got 38% of the budget that people aren't using buses. So I don't want to reopen it, but actually what the director's actually just said is, well, yes, you can do it, but no, you can't. So either we can do it or we can't do it. Simple as that.
Well, it's a principle of the Section 151 officer in relation to the ring fencing of individual budgets, and if that's acceptable to him and the portfolio holders, then that's fine. So that's my only point, Chair.
Do you want to come back?
But but the committee's made that recommendation, so I can see it as a
I was just going to
I'll
say,
say,
the committee has made this
so as a
recommendation.
recommendation, that's
It's now minuted and agreed. Should officers then decide through consultation with Councillor Dream that actually that commitment is not to be honoured, then we will ask those officers and Councillor Dream back to this committee and hold them accountable for what we've agreed today. Simple as that.
Yeah, so I'm completely clear with that. You're happy to do it, but there is a possibility something's going to impact that changes it. So it's a recommendation today coming from the committee, and we're happy to recommend it. You're happy to take it on board. If something changes, I'm sure you'll be able to justify it down the road. So I haven't got an issue with that. I'm looking for formal words.
We'll pick that up.
You going to pick that up?
Chair and Vice Chair.
Yeah.
So can I have a show of hands from the committee that we're happy with the recommendations that we've got here in front of us, and we're also happy that Anthony and Mark are going to work up a formal words around this concessionary funding ring fencing. Are we happy with that? And that's carried, lovely. Okay. Right, I now propose to have a quick 10-minute break. So back in the room at 3:15, please. Get us good fresh air, a glass of water, a cup of tea, comfort break, whatever you want to do. Thank you. All right, guys, thanks a lot for needed that, a little bit of a fresh air thing. If we're ready, we'll get some fresh air and have the committee go out for a smoke. So we move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the Shared Prosperity Fund. I believe officers have had a meeting around this subject today. I had the report through, very interesting reading, thank you very much. Very comprehensive, and well, any real questions around it, got some observations maybe. Can I ask, is there anything from your meeting today or anything that has changed from the issuing of the report that you would like to highlight to us before I invite questions from the committee around the report?
Yes, please, Chair. I'd just like to put through there that this fund is a replacement for the European funding, but the allocation we received does not match previous investments. very poor. We've only been allocated £3 million this time, which is about a third of our previous allocation. As you can imagine, that for us is disappointing. The formula government has used to allocate this money has disadvantaged Plymouth, and we've flagged this up to our local MPs. And in addition to that, I've also written to the Minister.
Thank you very much. Any officers want to?
Yeah, so just a couple of things, if I can, Chair. So the council's really good, or the economic development team are really good at securing money, and over the last 5 years we've secured 185 million from government. But this time we have a different role. We're administering the money, so that's quite So for the EU funding, the replacement for EU funding, we're administering it. So I mean, Amanda is the person leading this, and will be able to answer all of your questions. But there are two issues really. One is that the formula is construed in such a way. The way it works is Plymouth sits within Devon and Somerset, and that just disadvantages. So the calculation of our economic resilience and strength is sort of in a bigger block, which shows that Plymouth, which we know was an Objective 2 area, is potentially disadvantaged. So it'd be good to unpack that. And we also have to produce an investment plan. There's 3 priorities that are in the report: communities in place, innovation, people and skills. And we have to produce an investment plan for how we're going to approach that small amount of cash. So it's only 3.14 million over 3 years. So, most of it's backloaded into the final 18 months. So we're not, we do a lot of grant funding projects, a lot of investment, as you know, and 3.1 million is not a lot of money for the impact that we all want to have for the city in this sort of space. So I think we'd also be welcome your feedback on, given we've got 3.4 and we've got those 3 priorities, how best might we prioritise it in our report? And working with the Growth Board as the managing partnership, our view is we'd be better to do a fewer number of better projects. That's our opinion, as opposed to a huge amount, simply because we only get a flat fee to manage it. So the effort to manage lots and lots of small projects will just erode our ability to have impact. But we certainly like your impact on that, as with the Growth Board. So that's really the focus for today, those 2 areas. But Amanda may well want to pick up a couple of things.
The only other thing that came up was maybe looking at net zero as a cross-cutting theme in terms of that funding. That was the other thing that came up from sort of the discussions that we've literally just finished. We had 45 local businesses and community groups and organisations on a Teams call, and we've literally come from that into this meeting. Good debate for about an hour and 10 minutes.
So,
over to members. Councillor Gosling.
Question for David Draffen. What's the percentage decrease in this funding? You mentioned the reduction in funding from the equivalent EU funding that we used to receive.
it's about 4, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I might give you a far more precise answer.
So the previous European funding was, we were in something called a less favoured area, and it covered just Devon. And the allocation for Devon was 76 million over 8 years. And then Somerset had 23 million, also over the same period. Now that only includes ERDF and ESF. There are other European funds, and the examples of those are things like Interreg programmes, which you have to bid directly into Europe for. And we were really, really good at hoovering up that money. I mean, if you could find an obscure little fund, we found it and secured it. So at the moment, we've got I mean, one of the more obscure ones I picked, it was 250,000 towards sorting out the woodworm in the figureheads. That's not a normal European funded programme, but we found those, and we got hold of it. We got £1 million in the very last closing down of the European funds for Sea Care programme, and I could keep going. But so it's actually quite hard to do a direct comparison. But when I did a back of an envelope calculation, because it's not just Plymouth City Council, it's the university, it's the City College, it's the programmes that cover the whole of Devon, and then you've got an apportionment. It's about a third. So if we'd done well, we'd have got £10 million. We've actually got 3.14. And in the we've just gone out and asked we've done an expression of interest, and we had about £9 million worth of projects that have come in. So the demand and where we were before is about a third.
And if I may, it's worth perhaps just explaining that that's because this is our funding allocation has been used on a formula, and just simply because we're in a larger block that has, I guess, wealthier places in it, therefore the calculation isn't as sensitive. So that's fundamentally the issue that we've highlighted, as Mark said, both to our MPs who've been briefed and have raised the issue, but also Mark's written to Neil O'Brien, the Levelling Up Minister, on that basis as well.
So just for clarification...
Just a second. Can you switch your mic?
Just for clarification then, potentially you've lost £6 million from the local economy because the UK government has not funded grant schemes to the same level as EU schemes, or we don't have the ability to access that money that we used to under the EU grant schemes.
Councillor Gawsey, you are right there, but it's due more to the funding formula than anything else, and specifically picking on Plymouth.
So it's just Plymouth that's lost. Plymouth specifically has lost potentially £6 million in funding because of changes in where the funding's coming from versus EU versus UK government funding.
It's probably more accurate to say Devon has lost it, because it is the whole of Devon that were particularly disadvantaged in that formula calculation. And all of the Devon MPs have also written in. It's not just the Plymouth MPs.
And if I may, I mean, it's something we've approached on a cross-party basis for that basis, because I think what we're saying as a city is that, you know, we've got a brilliant track record in delivery. We've got actually a brilliant track record in getting funding, and we just think this allocation for the first 3 years, I mean, this will roll forward and keep going. So we shouldn't see this as a single point in time. You know, I think we do have a chance to have this conversation. So I just think I think there is a cross-party opportunity just to simply say that, you know, this funding formula has disadvantaged us. In the report, you'll see some of the comparisons drawn out with Cornwall. But as a result, you know, we're dealing with over 3 years, 3.14 million for the replacement of EU funding. And it's not, you know, this isn't a significant amount of money, which gives us a different problem to manage, which is how do we allocate that best? And I said that's the second part where we'd like your feedback. And we've given a view, which is we think there's a very big risk of doing a large number of very small projects which have no impact. And I think that's our view, and we'd be really interested in your input into that.
Councillor Finn.
The calculation was quite a complex calculation. They use an algorithm, and it was based on previous allocations per LEP area. So that's why we got bundled in with Somerset, not by Devon. So the first thing would be to be allocated on a Devon-wide basis, but actually putting more emphasis on some of our challenges. So educational attainment, number of people who are long-term sick, low levels of startup. If those were the factors that were put into the formula, then we would fare much better in terms of the allocation. So the key thing to do now is influence the algorithm that they will use in the next allocation.
So I just wanted to say something. I'm going to, first of all, thank you very much for the report, in that where you've used abbreviations, you've explained what those abbreviations are first, because those of you that know me know that it's one of my pets. So when we see PCC, then I want to see Plymouth City Council, and then you use PCC throughout the report. I'm happy to do that. I am aware, however, that when we're talking, and I find it, I don't know if it is me, but I found it particularly difficult to hear and understand people today. Right from the beginning of the meeting, I had a conversation with you about that. So although you have in the report quite clearly outlined where you've used an abbreviation, what that abbreviation means, can I ask, when we're talking, we don't use abbreviations, so use the full thing, so I'm not having to say, what did he or she just say, or which one's that, and try and find it in the report if it's a European funded. So just, and it's not criticism, it's just as I'm finding it difficult to hear, and it would be easier for us to understand. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. The Prime Minister in Cornwall said 10 days ago that the South West region would not lose out on previous EU funding under the SPF Shared Prosperity Fund. You've mentioned writing to the Minister, you've mentioned the cross-party work, which is excellent. I mean, what's your assessment of the scope that this will be reconsidered? Where are you on the sort of scale of optimism that this can be reconciled in some way?
Is that with regards to optimism or on the journey to gain more funding?
Well, both. In my mind, the two are innately linked.
I'm always optimistic. However, on the journey, with regards to the journey itself, in consideration that this is a very, very short programme, if you look, the inception was very early this year and conclusion is in August this year. I think for this tranche, we're not going to get any further. However, what it will have done is highlighted to our government and to ministers that we are down here, we are hungry, and that the formula's wrong.
If I can just add, I think that's exactly right. And we should remember this isn't, whilst this is the initial 3 years, and the money's actually backloaded into 24, 25?
Yeah.
So that's when the majority of the impact is. There's a much bigger prize here, which is, you know, beyond that. And we should also, so I think this round is allocated. We've been given it. You know, there is no sort of right to appeal that. We're working through it with trying to make sense of how we allocate that. But we should also remember there's lots of other funds as well. So where Plymouth's done incredibly well is where the funds are competitive and there's no allocation. So whilst we might be overall a lower amount of money available for the UK, we've gained a much higher percentage of that. So that's, for the last 10 years, it's been hugely to our advantage, way ahead of the formula, because we've been so successful at advocating winning money. So we have to look at it in the round. If you look at the whole of the picture over the last 10 years, we've done exceptionally well. As I said, I think the figure, this is capital, is 185 million in 5 years. So I think we'll be bidding for levelling up funding, which is the capital fund, and we'll keep going. But for this one, our focus needs to be for the next round, which will be, I think, an assessment of how successful our projects are, how well we administer this fund, and also the case that we make. But certainly, I mean, I think that's why we're really open about it in the report. I think it is disappointing, and you know, it's not what we expected or wanted.
Councillor Gosling.
So at the start, you stated you wanted a steer on how to focus this reduced fund. So and you mentioned that you would have a preference for funding fewer larger projects rather than a large amount of smaller projects. And you also had a focus on net zero. Is that the case? So you want to have smaller, larger projects with a specific focus on net zero? Because there's a range of focuses under this fund, and that's specifically where you want to aim the fund currently?
So a couple of things. First of all, there's only 4% that you can use for administering the fund. And each of the applications, you can push the money out through 3 methodologies. You can do in-house delivery, you can issue grants, or you can directly procure specific services. Each of those require a project application form, a technical assessment, monitoring and an evaluation, and a project closure and an evaluation. That's 5 stages. So if you have got, let's say, £130,000 projects, you will burn through, and each of those projects have got to complete those processes. You will burn through a lot of the energy and effort will go into that process. But if you had, let's say, 8 to 10, 2 to 400,000 pound projects, it's the same amount of work, but more of it goes to actual direct delivery on the ground rather than those processes. So our recommendation would be, rather than spread the jam very thin, is to actually have, it's not a particularly good analogy, but some actual sizable projects. I mean, still, that's not a very big project, because a 200 or 300,000 pound project, realistically, doesn't employ lots of people. It can be a very key thing to achieve some very key outcomes, but it's not a £2 million project in itself. I mean, we have got some business support projects, like Mayflower, which is 2.6 million and has been running over 3 years. That's just one project. And actually, this is an example of where they're replacing all European funding with a similar size pot. So that's why we think that, you know, our analogy would be both in terms of officer time, but also in terms of project time, that they could, the majority of the money can actually go to making a difference on the ground rather than administering the money. The issue around net zero was something that came out in the conversation, and actually in the EOIs, which only came in on, we only had like the final sort of version of those coming in on Monday, so we had the opportunity to actually sort of read them. Yeah, sorry, expression of interest. So, really sorry. Those expressions of interest picked out. There was a theme that was coming through them, yeah, and you could see some of those themes. But the one that stood out the most was around net zero, carbon, and that's one of the things that, you know, we think would. You also look at other strategies that the council has got. It would make sense to make sure that this funding helps to deliver that.
So one interesting thing you mentioned in the light of wanting to fund fewer projects is that you said that the maximum costs is 4% of the fund. So for next year, you've got about 12,000. You can only spend about £12,000 to administer the programme. That's tiny. So you can only run. I mean, I don't know how feasibly you could ever run a large number of small projects with that, because you've got such a small administrative time. So it doesn't seem that you've got much choice in the fact that you have to choose a very small number of projects. And 315,000, well, that's what, 1-2 projects? One small project, effectively?
Yeah.
I think we entirely agree. And, you know, I suppose in terms of the administration cost, you have to remember that we do have an economic development team who, you know, will go out and help write applications to support people. You know, notwithstanding we're missing the fund, we've got people who can help. So there is, you know, it's not just that we have a retained overhead in the department who people, you know, we're bringing forward projects all the time. You know, projects don't get imagined. There's a hopper of them that are ready to go at any one time. But I think your analysis is pretty accurate.
Councillor Salmon.
Just a very small point, Chair. I believe the emphasis was initially put on fewer, better projects, not necessarily larger projects. I just thought I'd point that out. Thank you.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. I understand from the papers that there was, you had the engagement sessions and local partners would be involved in the drawing up of the bids and et cetera that went into the formula and allocation process. You know, our Conservative leader of Plymouth City Council has prioritised jobs and growth very recently. What's your assessment of the business community's reaction to this news, given that these would have been a lot of potential business projects involved? And How, you know, what's your sort of plan for engagement with the business community on any projects that would have been affected by this?
So that was the call that I've just come off. So, for example, the Federation of Small Business was on the call, as was the Chamber of Commerce. We're using the Growth Board as the partnership that oversees that fund, which has got representation from all the key business organisations. It's got the Plymouth Manufacturers Group, Federation of Small Business, Social Enterprise, some of the main big employers. We've got Babcock, Princess Yachts, Plymouth Manufacturers Group. So it feels like a bit of a list that I'm trying to hold in my head and not use acronyms. So
when answering your question about how's their response, I mean, I think you've got to remember that, as I said in the round, we don't rely on one pot of funding for our success. So, you know, we're working, and we've been so successful at tracking down money where we, you know, using creative financial instruments ourselves, use of land and property. So, you know, I think whilst there's disappointment with this fund, there is buoyant optimism around opportunities. So I think people are pragmatic. I think the honest answer is we will invest a proportionate amount of time into administering £3 million, and that's the bottom line. You know, if it was 50 million, I think we might have a different conversation. So, but that doesn't mean that we won't be, you know, going after net zero funding, export funding, port-related funding in other pots, and levelling up funding at the moment. So I don't think people are sort of, you know, saying, oh, this is the end of the world. I just think they're saying, therefore, there's a proportionate amount of effort going to go into that pot of money right now, if I'm really honest.
That's helpful to hear, thank you. We have seen business groups across the country sort of have more negative reactions, so it's you know, testament to the council if there's an understanding there. I guess my supplementary question relates to these kind of smaller, less impactful projects that will have to be put to the side. Are any of those pre-existing projects that you were hoping to continue that will no longer be able to carry on?
So there are some smaller projects that have come in, and I'll give an example. There was a £90,000 immersive women in immersive tech project, which scored, you know, when you look through it, the outputs were quite high. It linked into the Devonport Market Hall project. Now that's only sort of that sort of £90,000, but there were some other projects. There was another digital project. So what we will probably do in that instance is ask them to work together and then make that into a slightly larger project, and so we can meld some projects together, and we did that with the community renewal. So there was an example where Nudge, who work on Union Street, worked alongside Street Factory, and we got a critical mass together on that project. So that would be the approach that we would take, rather where we can get projects to work together, if that makes sense. But it has to make sense. You don't want to sort of falsely package things together that don't make sense.
Well, there are lots of projects in the city that are constantly chasing revenue funding, as you know. And if it wasn't this pot, it would be the next one or the one after that. And I think that, you know, that we'll always get this is the point to make at the beginning. We're administering this fund here. We're not, you know, it's sort of, we have a rules-based approach we have to follow in the government criteria. So we're not able to just make the rules up, and you know, it's a very different role for us. In the past, this would have been done by not a local authority; it would be done by a different organisation. But I think again, I think we're disappointed. We've been really open about that. I think we've done stuff to evidence that. But I got to keep saying this is only one small part of that funding jigsaw. So the idea that, you know, we dust ourselves off and we go and chase the next one, we build the next one. So the really important thing is to make sure that we make the point now that the allocation's poor. We make sure the money's proportionate. That doesn't mean it'll only be large projects. Or I think it's just saying that there's a principle here, probably in terms of our investment plan. But if there's brilliant small projects and they're absolutely outstanding, then that's okay too. So I think, you know, and what I will say is, you know, the team we've got here, incredibly experienced in this space, and they've done it for other organisations, for previous EU funding rounds as well. So and we were also a pilot with the Community Renewal Fund, which was the pilot. So we've had a bit of practice, but fundamentally we don't have the money we think we deserve or would like. That's it.
You got nothing? Anthony, do you want to say anything?
No, thanks, Chair. The team have covered it all. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. It's a comprehensive report, and I fully get. And in response, I picked it out from the report anyway about how small the funding was from previous. About you want to concentrate, and I'll take you to your point about the 5 elements to every project. And I think the questions that have come out today reflect that we understand that. So, right at the beginning, you talked, David, about the guidance, the committee giving you guidance. I think you give your own guidance through the committee today.
Yeah.
Really, it come around in that manner. So, I've got to say, without trying to embarrass anybody, I think we've got a good track record in Plymouth over the years with securing funding and with the projects that we've administered, we've brought together across party. It is disappointing this time around. There's a small bit of funding, but like you say, that's 2025. Who's to say that whoever administers this don't think we're fantastic? What we had this time around to give us a little bit more next time. We've got to keep them appraised of where we are. So I think I haven't got any burning recommendation that I've got coming out. We've talked in the report that we know the report and we have provided a view. I'm happy with that. I don't think I'm confident from the answers you guys have given us that you're going to get this right and apply this in the best way will be. So I'll just look maybe when we get an update down the road that we're happy with that, unless anybody's got anything different they want to say.
I think, you know, if they're seeking a recommendation to follow a point of prioritization of smaller, larger grants, we should be able to make that recommendation. They've made that call to us. We've agreed with it, so we can make that recommendation. And then they can go away with that.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. If you're happy with that, we can make that as a recommendation. We'll work up a formal word to that, really. We're happy with that? Yeah, good idea. So there's nothing more. Are we all happy with that? Yeah. There's nothing more than we're happy to pass that recommendation forward. Show of hands. Thank you very much. Right, item 10, which is the tracking decisions, pages 57 to 58, and they're merely for committee to note. Yeah, they're all last year's, and looks like yes, they've all been completed as well, so I don't see any issue with that. Moving on to the final item on the agenda, the work programme. I think the work programme that you have in front of you, you've got nothing for September? Councillor Tibbetts?
Well, I'm assuming you're looking for recommendations on what we put on the agenda based on the list here.
Yes.
Yeah, it seems that there's a big thing here on, there's 2 items on sustainable transport and bus service delivery, and considering the commitment that we got today about the ring fencing, I think it would, well, the recommendation, I think that would make sense to follow through with that at the next committee with those 2 items. So sustainable transport in the city and bus service delivery and improvement in the city.
Chair, could I?
Yeah. And yeah, can I bring you on this? Because there's a historical application to this, isn't it?
Yeah. Chair, there's what we've tried to do with this committee previously is try and bring things through to scrutiny which are in advance of decisions that will be made either through cabinet or through council. So it gives the opportunity for pre-decision scrutiny. So I've been talking with the teams about the priorities that we've got as we move forward, and where we would really like and appreciate assistance, help and advice. And there's a few areas for September and December that really are quite priorities for us as an organisation, and I think you as a committee should be considering. So the first thing, and it won't have escaped your attention, is the announcements around the Freeport, which is most likely the biggest single economic. So interestingly, that comes back to sort of in a way the discussion we just had about funding that comes in. And there's an example of where we've been incredibly brave politically across both parties, where we've been joined at the hip as to priorities and opportunity, and much to many people's surprise, was selected as one of the 8 Freeports. We've now got, it's been taken through Parliament, and our outline business case has been approved, and now we've got to move into, we've submitted off our full business case, which is incredibly complex. I mean, the amount of work required to get it to the stage it's at is incredible. And we've now got a period of mobilisation, and we've got Freeport mobilisation over the next 6 months. And one item that we would most definitely like Scrutiny to have a really good look at is, in that 6-month period at the midway point, the mobilisation of the Freeport and all elements of that. So I think that's absolutely critical for Scrutiny to have a look at in September. We've also got the work that we're doing in relation to the Heritage Lottery Fund, another area where we've obtained significant money, and again a big cross-party project around the National Marine Park, and an update on the National Marine Park and input from the Scrutiny Committee on its direction of travel and the journey it's going on, bearing in mind we've got a circa £13 million programme with the Heritage Lottery Fund. That would be a really good issue as well for you to put some attention to before we recommend to the HLF what the focus is. So those are 2 really big items for September. One of the other items which I think is a pressing issue for us as a council, and seeking scrutiny recommendation going forward in support, is the challenge we're going to undoubtedly face with our city centre. So city centre regeneration and everything associated with that, and some of the challenges that we're going to need to overcome. And another area which I think you will as a committee be interested in seeing is we are the location for the British Art Show, and I think the British Art Show review and link to the box annual review, which we have to do. We've got to do an annual review of the box, I think would also be useful. So notwithstanding the points that have been made today, I think that would make a full agenda for September. And I don't want to dictate, but I'm just trying to give a steer. And then we're bringing back climate change, which I think would be the perfect time in relation to the points you've raised today around various issues, whether it be transport, waste or whatever, both in our progress reports in December, but also our action plan and our focus for 23-25, and how we change that and have a more strategic plan, and seeking this committee's input and view to that would be an important item for the December committee. So and we've got some annual updates we have to bring, because we say we will bring them as well around the culture plan and the visitor plan, which we need to programme in. So I mean, those are some things I don't think we can avoid doing in the next 2 committee meetings, if I'm being honest, Chair. Scrutiny's input and advice on that would be exceedingly welcomed and valued.
Yeah, so I'm happy for that, and I'm happy. Thanks for the input. Just a second, Councillor. I'm happy for that, and I've looked at, and I've got those in front of me. Just need to put it out there before we go into the detail. I looked at the previous committees, the meetings of this committee, and very often was 3.5 hours on a Wednesday afternoon, from 2 to 5:30. I want to try and get away from that. I think it's too long. I personally don't want to chair meetings for 3.5 hours on a Wednesday afternoon. So I'm looking at ways I'm looking at ways of reducing that. I'm looking at ways of putting together maybe little groups to take on particular things that you might be interested in. That's ongoing. So that's why the work programme in front of us at the moment is not, I'm aware of the stuff that Anthony's just talked about, and I think it's right for us to look at it. But I want to try and make the committee run a little bit more efficiently than 3.5-hour meetings, because I think it drags out. So that's where I am on that, and that's why you haven't got anything in your work programme at the moment, but I've got stuff that's been suggested. So on the bus and the climate and everything else, as Anthony says, that's coming back in December anyway. So I don't know, is that, how would you view that?
I just think that it's a little disappointing that we didn't have the different items in advance of the meeting. I substituted on children and the children social care and education overview and scrutiny last week, and we had a much more full list of items that were listed that we could then put, that the committee members did put into the schedule for the next meeting. So I think just a point to raise is it would have been more helpful for us as councillors to be able to see those in advance. And again, we did go on for 3 hours and 10 minutes in education and children's social care because it's important that we do scrutinise these decisions as a committee in a public forum where the public can watch what we're saying as councillors, because we are accountable to the public.
I don't disagree with that, but I can remind members that not only 3 years ago, we had 2 scrutiny committees in the council. So where did all this work get dealt with in 3 years ago? So what I'm not, as a chair, really interested in doing is just piling up tons, because for scrutiny, if you look at our terms of reference, pretty much everything we do in the council, you could bring forward to the scrutiny committee. So what I want to do is scrutinise what we need to scrutinise and scrutinise it thoroughly. I don't want to pack the agenda so that we're skipping through, and I've been in scrutiny committees myself where we've got 15 items on the agenda. We're getting to a period of time, the last 3 items, you don't even give them 10 minutes. I don't want that to happen in our scrutiny committee. I believe today, in the couple of hours that we've been here, we've done a really good job on the 3 items that we've had on the agenda. That's what I believe. So I agree with you, Councillor Tippis, with regards, it's disappointing that it's not on the agenda, but I can assure you it was in my mind. It will be finalised in the next 6 or 7 days or whatever, and you will be made aware of that well in advance and have the reports. So just before I bring Councillor Rendy in, can I bring in?
Yeah, so it's just to say, for you, Chair, obviously the work programme was obviously what was previously agreed by the last committee. So obviously Jemima's remained chair from the children's one, which is why the work programme was a bit more full. And after publication of the agenda is when the chair and I have met about the additional items, which is what he's raised. So it wasn't anything on the agenda at the time of publication.
Yeah, so I'm taking full responsibility for that. The reason it's not finalised because I'm the new chair and I don't want to do it the way it was done before. I'm not saying it was done wrong. I just want to do it differently. That's all. No, fine. So that's just that in mind. You will be notified of what's going on, and we will scrutinise things properly. But I am genuinely wary about just packing an agenda and giving stuff cursory look at. It's not proper scrutiny for me, and I don't want to do it. I'd rather move it on to the next agenda and give it its first time. So, Councillor Rendy.
Just want to agree with the chair, really. I've been on the committee for a couple of years and it was packed in, and we were losing committee members towards the end of the day because they were just getting fed up. They were going. I was actually not going to be on the committee this year, and I was quite thankful because it just goes on and on. But now they've put me back on it, and you're saying a couple hours, which is great. If we can deal with things but be a bit more punchy and not just drag it out, I'm happy for that. I think we need to do a bit more with the buses. I don't know when we can do that, which is important, but it's also important not to do too much at once because you just lose the impact on what we're trying to achieve. So I do welcome what the chair is suggesting.
So I'm new to it. I'm going to get things right. I'm going to get things wrong. I'm glad to hear that you're supporting that approach. To give you an idea of where I think things would go, the things that we're talking about the buses today, which is very, very important, all right? I'd like to see maybe, and I've got this meeting set up, that we can maybe pick up 2 or 3 or 4 of us who've got a real interest in that particular item and take it on board and get out of it rather than bring all the items to the full committee at all time. So that's, that's work ongoing, and that's where I would like to see it go, because I think you get a far better handle and an in-depth look at something that is that important. So Councillor Coker.
Yeah, I just want to assure members that talking to the chair, I really do think there is a way forward in this, because task and finish groups amongst our committee, I'll call them that because I haven't got a better name. But, you know, I've made a note of everything the director has said, and I agree. But when you look at our scrutiny prioritization tool, top of the agenda is public interest on these things. And the couple of things that we talked about earlier on, we talked about the impact of the environmental bill that's going through Parliament. That will affect every resident in the city, whether they're well off, not so well off, and that has got to be high on our priority. And I agree with Councillor Tippett. We've exposed today the fragility of the bus network. That is something that we owe the residents, that we need to keep a real eye on that, because the minute the bus industry falls over, the public are not going to blame Citybus or Stagecoach or whoever it is. They're going to say to PCC, what have you done? So I think I fully support John in saying, let's have the huge wider issues discussed at this environment. We can then go back and do a task and finish group, Chair, on these issues that we've identified that are important, and then bring that report back to all of you, and then take it up with the cabinet member. And I think that's the way to go forward. You've got Philip next.
Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair, I agree. It's, from new members, it's similar to how licensing is run. They only call the full committee in for wider issues, and then the most important licensing issues, there's 3 or 4 of us, either the chair or the vice chair, and task and finish is quite an apt word. Councillor Coker, I like it. It creates much more fluidity, and it means quality over quantity, and things get done much quicker. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Finn.
Yeah, just to say, I fully support your proposal. I think the idea of having subgroups to discuss specific interests of interest to certain members is a good idea, to formulate their ideas, recommendations, and then bring them back to scrutiny at a later stage. So you get a more condensed view at the same time. So hence I just fully support what the Chair's proposed.
Councillor Salmon.
Yeah, I'd just like to add my opinion as well. I can't but agree with Councillor Hendy, yourself, Councillor Coker and yourself, Chair. I mean, we could be sitting here now, let's go on to fisheries, let's go on to taxi, let's go on to whatever, you know. It's a great idea. It also works, as you know, on taxis before, etc., where you can get people sitting down and then reporting back in a sensible fashion to the whole committee. So I'm totally in favour. Thank you.
Councillor Gosling.
Just to strike a contrarian note, there's that one of the dangers of splitting the committee into subcommittees of people interested in particular special interests is that you tend to have more extreme views as people. You tend to only have people on those subcommittees that are interested in that particularly hobby horse of theirs. So you tend to get, you don't tend to get a wider view of generalists that don't have strong opinions on that and actually reflect the views of the public. So there is a danger to doing that, is that you end up with more extremism, because, I know extremist fisheries policy or extremist transport policy or extremist taxi policy or bus policy, but it does tend to be the case that if you do that, that's what you'll end up with.
I get that, and that's why Councillor Coker alluded that it would always come back to the full committee anyway, before it went forward. So I get that. Anthony?
could I just come in on this? Because, I mean, I hear everything that's being said. I think two things. One is there is a corporate review of the role and function of scrutiny, which is going to be ongoing over the next few months. So I think anything that we change has to be reflective of that. So I don't think we can ignore that and make changes in isolation. So that's a piece of work which hasn't been commissioned yet. The terms of reference still need to be agreed, but it's something the Chief Exec has asked for. So I think any changes that we want to do to our committee's work need to be a reflection of that. Otherwise, we'll be going maybe slightly down a different route. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is those of you who haven't been on this committee, I mean, I have found it incredibly helpful with the recommendations we've had historically. So actually, whilst the meetings have been at times lengthy, the output has been incredibly helpful and really, really positive. And I really wouldn't want to lose that. However, the one element that I am concerned about around too many different separate groups being created is the capacity within teams to then service it and to be able to deal with it. And we are incredibly stretched with everything that we're doing. So we've got to bear in mind and be very appreciative of the resource we've got within teams, both within the centre where Jamie provides superb support, but also within the actual areas of focus as well, and the capacity of teams to do their day jobs, to do their delivery within the constraints of everything else that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So it's not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying just have a recognition of that challenge and that issue.
Can I? I'm going to come back and ask Anthony for clarification more than anything.
I might not be able to tell you.
So if because last year I agree with Councillor Hendy, some of our meetings were torturous. Because, and Councillor Salmon, because there was so much on it. Now, I'm under the understanding that even without changing the rules on scrutiny to kind of fit in with what Councillor Gosling was saying, we could say that as chair, or John, as chair, could say to the management board, we are really concerned about X.
Yeah, that's true.
All right? So we want to set up a task and finish group on X because it's going to take longer than we can give it time for at one of these committee meetings. So how I see it is not kind of, Councillor Gosling, we have a kind of select narrow thing, but if we want to give something greater time and greater in-depth scrutiny, we can say we want, I mean, there's 13 of us on this committee, so we can say we could recommend a task and finish group of 7 just to look at one specific issue that's vexing the community. I don't think the chair is saying we want to abdicate the whole agenda and give it to each little committee. But if there's something that we want to get under the skin of, that we can do that process. I might be wrong, but I'm just seeking clarification there.
Councillor Andy?
Yeah, obviously we don't want to miss anything out. We just want to streamline things. I don't know if it's possible, whether we can do things like what they do in the Fire Authority now, where they do members forum meetings, but they're actually doing them by teams, so we can just have a punchy hour where we can discuss certain things before it comes to the committee, just to sort of, so the people that are interested in certain items can attend those forum meetings if they wish, but still have a streamlined meeting after. I don't know if that's the answer, but just ways of looking at a forward approach.
So I just wanted to say, that's definitely something that we're looking at. I've got a training session that's been offered to me with regards to what we can do with teams and everything else. I probably need to stress at this point, I didn't want to spend ages in these today talking about this because we're not going to finalise anything today. All I've just come with a broader broader aspect of looking at it. If we can get away from 3.5 hour meetings, 3 3/4 hour meetings, where the agenda's absolutely packed, if we can do that in some way that still gets us scrutinising what we need to, and scrutinise in a proper manner and coming out with the recommendations that are needed around that subject, then I'm happy to do that. I've got meetings set up to talk about that and discuss the best way forward in that. I'm open to all suggestions. I'm not going to rule anything in or out. I'm just trying to improve the experience of the scrutiny committee from an absolutely packed at the door agenda 3.5 hours ago, and I don't think that does the subjects that we're looking at justice. Maybe it could be as simple as the tool that we use, which Jamie's talked about previously, and Councillor Cook just talked about saying the scrutiny prioritisation tool, where we actually give it a score. We could actually use that to filter out a lot of stuff which it would be nice to have in scrutiny maybe, but not necessary. There's something that's more pressing. And the other thing I want to do is I want to have a capacity. It happened to me last year. We got backed up with procedure in time with regard to taxi licensing policy that we wanted to get through back in March's AGM, March's full council. And it's getting it into scrutiny, going through the process. Now, I was very, very indebted to Councillor Penberthy, who in his scrutiny made room for us to come and present that taxi licensing policy. Otherwise, it couldn't go through the full council. It needed to go scrutiny first. So the other element of it as well is I don't want to put the agenda out the door so that if something comes in,
And through you, Chair, it was also just to say that obviously going forward as well, Chair and Vice Chair will be meeting to settle future agendas, wasn't it? And this one, obviously, so all items will be considered there together.
Yeah, I was about to make the same point as Councillor Salmon. You know, this is a very, very chunky, you know, we've got 15, 16 items in the terms of reference, many of which are featured in that potential gridding document. Now, we've probably all got individual interests that would skew us to what our residents care about, buses and, you know, the box or, you know, whatever it may be in particular wards and so forth. But there are big items in there, such as, you know, corporate property, you know, big strategic procurement, for example, which if we got too much of I'm not saying we need to pack an agenda, I just think we need an appreciation that we have a responsibility as a committee to make sure these big items for the council get covered sufficiently.
and that is a point well made, absolutely 100% totally agree with you. So I think on, just to close the meeting there today, look at the agenda, it turns around and says to agree the work stream forward. We're not agreeing it today. I'm gonna go away, take a bit of advice. We're gonna have a look at different bits and pieces. I'm gonna have a conversation with the Vice Chair. I'm taking legal advice on stuff as well, and we will come back and promulgate out to you. In the meantime, email, whatever you want to do, a Teams or a phone call, whatever. If there's anything that pops into your mind that you want to contribute, I'm happy. Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance today. Go and have a nice glass of wine or a cold beer in the garden this evening.